Let's explore some more advanced layout ideas that we can use with CSS. Now, in order to demonstrate what we're going to be talking about in this lesson, I just opened this website and I want to show you something. At first glance, here we see a normal looking website, a very nicely laid out website, and you can see this is laid out on a grid, good typography, good spacing, etc., etc. Now, as I take the browser and make it smaller, watch what's going to happen. As I do this, you can see that the design is shrinking and adapting itself to the width of the browser. So if I was viewing this website on a mobile phone, this is what I would see. It looks good, it looks clean, it's easy to navigate. I can scroll down. If I was viewing this perhaps on a tablet, I would maybe see something like this on an iPad, for example. And if I view this on a desktop computer, like the one I'm using right now, I see the full-blown website. This is called responsive web design, and it's one of the nicest, most amazing things you can do with CSS. And the beauty of this website is that it's going to look good no matter how you view it, whether it's on a mobile phone, a tablet, or a desktop, or anything in between. The site itself is responding to the size of the viewport. In other words, it's responding to the size of the screen being used to view it, and it offers many advantages. Number one, more and more visitors are going mobile. Mobile is extremely important in web design, and we have to always be conscious that an ever-increasing number of people are going to visit our sites on mobile phones. The second big advantage is that instead of creating different sites for different versions and different viewports, we can create one site that responds to the size of the layout. And believe it or not, creating a site that is responsive is quite simple once we understand a couple basic concepts. And what we're going to do in this lesson is create a simple layout that will be responsive and will be optimized for three different sizes. One desktop, the middle one being a tablet or an iPad, and finally a phone size. So let's go ahead and open Dreamweaver. And I'm going to create a new HTML file. I'm going to save this on my desktop. I'm going to call this responsive demo. And I'm going to save this as index.html. Obviously, our next step is to create a new CSS and attach it, so let's go ahead and do that. Save as stylesheet.css in that same root folder. Close it. And we're ready to start marking up our code. So let me change the title here. And we'll begin by, as always, laying out the outermost element. Let's create a container. And I'm going to close that out. And I always like to put my comment at the end there just to remind me of what's closing where. And inside of the container, we're going to have a header div. We're going to make this a very simple layout. Below that, we're going to have a content div. So we're not even going to make a sidebar in this case. And below that, a footer. So let's go ahead and attach that style sheet before I forget. And there we are. Now I can go toggle over to my style sheet and we can start coding our elements. Now let's do the following. I'm going to start by styling my container. I'm going to give it a width of 600 pixels. And let's go ahead and center it. So that would be margin auto. And let's give it a min height, 900 pixels. And actually, let's give it a background color too while we are at it, just so we can see it. I'm going to make it a very light gray. So if we preview this in our browser, we have this. Now you see here that this is actually could be bigger, but I'm going to start by creating the version that's for the tablet first. And then I'm going to modify it to be for use on a desktop, and then we'll go down to the phone size. So we're starting with the middle one. You don't necessarily have to do it this way. You can start with the big one and create the other ones afterwards. It really doesn't matter, as you're going to see in just a few moments. While we're at it, let's go ahead and get some placeholder text. So we'll go to lipsum.com again. My favorite place for placeholder text. And we'll just grab a couple paragraphs here. And I'm going to go to my content div, and I'll put that content in there. And I'll just close my paragraph tags here. And let's say that this was a website about climbing Mount Everest. So I'll put a little header here. Oops, H1, forgot about that. So if I view this in my browser so far, I have this. Let's go ahead and keep styling it. Let's create our header. For the width, I'm just going to say 100%, as we did before. As far as the height, we'll do 150 pixels. We'll see what that looks like. And let's give it a background color. We'll change the color afterwards. We're actually going to insert a background image. So we'll leave it there for now. And while we're at it, let's change the fonts for the body. So font family, I'm going to go with Palatino. See what we have so far. Okay, so there's our header. Now you see that the text here is touching the edges of the container. There are a lot of ways I can do that. Bring it in, I can give it padding. I can reduce the width of the container or of the content div. So for example, if I did the following with content, this is another technique. Oops. Content. Width, I'm going to go with 95%, and I'm going to center it. Watch what happens. I just made it 95% of its containing element, and I centered it with the margin auto, which takes care of it very nicely. I also see my paragraphs are sort of tightly packed, so I want to increase the line height a little bit maybe. Paragraph. Line height, let's go with 25 pixels. Okay, that looks a little better. Finally, let's style the footer. Width 100%. Height, we'll go with 75 pixels. Background color, we'll just do it any color right now. We're going to change it and make it look pretty. Right now we're just interested in getting the layout done. And you'll notice that the min height I give the container is too much, so I'm going to go ahead and take the min height out of the container. I just wanted to give it a height before we had put the contents in. So here we have a layout. Now, I have this image here of Mount Everest in Photoshop. And what I want to do is I want to create this as a background image for my header div here. So this header here is 600 pixels wide, which is the width of the container, and it's 150 pixels tall. So I can go into Photoshop, I can get my crop tool, width 600 pixels, height 150 pixels. Make sure you enter px, otherwise it's going to default to inches and you don't want to do that. Alright, I'm happy with that right there. I'm going to go to File, Save for Web, and I'm going to select a JPEG. I'm going to try high quality. Alright, that's fine. I'm going to save it, and I'm going to go to my desktop, my root folder, responsive demo, create a new folder, images, and save it in there. Let's go ahead and add that in the CSS. So for my header, I will add a background image, and I'll browse for that. There it is. Now, there's a distinction here. Remember, here we're adding the image as a background to the element, we're not putting the image in the source code, which would be putting it in the HTML using the image tag. They're two different things. So upon viewing this on my browser, there's my image, and it's starting to look a little better now, so let's go ahead and get rid of that ugly green footer and maybe put some text in it. I'll just grab a couple sentences of placeholder text, put them in the footer. Just like that, and I'll style it a little bit more. So I'm going to reduce the font size. I'm going to do it 12 pixels, text align, center. And background color. Let's remove it for now, see what it looks like. Save it, preview it. And I can reduce the line height, maybe 16 pixels, and I can again give it a width of 95% and a margin auto. That'll just make it a little bit smaller and center it, thus doing that. Okay, so I'm almost ready to style my page. Now, I'm pretty happy with what I have so far. This is a very simple page, and we're going to keep it simple for the purposes of making this responsive. Now, obviously, this is not responsive at all. If I resize my browser, I go down to font size, oops, I get a horizontal scroll bar. I don't want that. There's nothing wrong with vertical scrolling. We like to scroll vertically. We don't like to scroll horizontally, especially at small sizes. We should always avoid vertical scroll bars. Okay, let me go ahead and just change the colors a little bit. So I'm going to make the body, I'm going to give it a background color. I'll make it, how about that? And I'll remove the background color from the container, which looks kind of ugly. I'll just make it white. Okay, that looks a little bit better perhaps. I could spend a lot more time styling it, but right now we're just going to make it responsive. Now, what is the magic thing about making sites responsive? The first thing is what are called CSS media queries, and it has a very strange sounding name, but all a CSS media query is a sub-style sheet that will only kick in under a certain condition, and that condition would be the size of the window being used to view the site. So basically I'm going to be saying if the window goes above X amount of pixels, then do the following. If the window goes below X amount of pixels, then do X, Y, and Z. Now, I decide as a web designer what size that is going to happen at, and there's a couple parameters that we can follow. So let's go ahead and go to our CSS, and we're going to first of all start by creating the version for the desktop. If we look at this here, this is fine for a tablet, but we're going to go ahead and make this bigger for a desktop computer. Okay, now the media query consists of the following. I'm going to enter the following code. Okay, so what am I doing here? I'm using a media query command, and that's done with media screen. What this basically says in plain English is if this is being viewed through a screen and the screen is at least 1200 pixels wide, then do this. And the first thing I want to do under that condition is increase the size of the container. So I'll make the width perhaps 1100 pixels. If I save this and preview in my browser, this still needs adjusting, but watch what happens now. How nice is that? As the browser window increases in size, suddenly, as soon as it hits 1200 pixels, that container expands to 1100 pixels, which is what I told it to do. I can do anything I want. This is like almost like a separate style sheet. For example, I can do something like, for demonstration purposes, body, background color, make it orange. This is not going to look too good, but it's going to work. You'll notice that now when my site goes above that breakpoint, it turns orange. I'm going to go ahead and undo that. So again, there's really nothing different going on here than what we've been doing before. We're basically just going to adjust our layout inside of this media query to fit our needs. So one of the things I wanted to do was 1100 pixels for that. Now you'll notice that let me save this, there we go. My background image is repeating. And that's repeating because the header is much bigger, it's almost twice as big. So I need to create a header that is perhaps taller and a header image that's bigger and longer. So I'm going to go back to Photoshop, and I'm going to do that. Now in my crop here, I'm going to enter a crop size of 1100 pixels and a size of perhaps, let's go with 200 pixels. Okay. Once I'm happy with it, again, save for web. Click save again, and I'm going to call this one Everest large.jpg. And then now all I'm going to do is back in my code, not only is the container going to be 1100 pixels wide, it's going to have a background image that's different, and this time it's Everest large. If I preview that, oops, that's not for the container, I'm sorry, that's for the header. Let me cut that out. It would be hashtag header. Paste it back in. And let me just get rid of the extra space here. Okay. There we go. Now you'll see that we go to the small size. It looks very nice. We go to the large size, and it works well. Now the last challenge is the small phone size, and again the idea here is exactly the same. Now I created one breakpoint for the large size. Now I'm going to create another media query or breakpoint for the smaller size. I need to close this properly. There we go. Same thing, at media screen, and in this case I'm going to go with max width. I'm going to try something like 760 pixels. which would be a good size, a good max size for mobile phones and that type of device. And I'm going to do the same thing for my container. I'm going to give it a width of, let's say, 320 pixels. And I will have to change the header image again. Okay, now, so that means I'm going to go to my document here, again, back to the same document, and this time the width is going to be 320, and maybe the height is going to be 80, or maybe less than that, 50. Let's go with 70. Okay, file, save for web. Click save. I'm going to call this Everest small. And again, I'm just going to insert that in my header. Everest small. And we'll preview that. And also you notice it's repeating because I need to reduce the size of the header. So I said it's how many pixels tall? 70 pixels high, so height 70 pixels, and that takes care of the problem. And now I have a nicely responsive website going from desktop to tablet to mobile phone. Now, as a site gets smaller and smaller, this site here is very simple. So really, we don't need to get rid of anything. It works fine at the phone size than as the desktop size. But you'll notice that on a site like this one, for example, that I showed you in the beginning, as you go through and you get smaller and smaller, you're getting rid of a lot of content. You might have to get rid of things that are superfluous or not that important. You have to start prioritizing as you get smaller. So what would happen if, for example, I wanted to, let's look at my site again, I wanted to get rid of that header image because on a phone, really the amount of space you would have would be something more like this, and that's a lot of very valuable real estate at a very small size. What happens if I want to get rid of an element? I'm going to just change the display to none. Display none removes it as if it never existed in the first place. There it is. Now I go down to the phone size and it's not there. And again, you can change your layout for these different versions. You can do different things with your links. You can convert a horizontal nav bar to a vertical nav bar. You can get rid of elements. You can add elements. You can do whatever you want. Again, the key trick here is trial and error. Now let's demonstrate another concept. We've looked at the first thing we need to know for responsive web design, which is having media queries, which are these elements right here. The second thing we need are what are called responsive images. And just to demonstrate that, let me insert this image again. I know it's the same image, but I'm just going to go ahead and save this as Everest biggest, and I'm going to save this in images. This is a very large image, and I'm deliberately making it large to show you something. I'm going to go to the source code. I'm going to put this big image of Mount Everest in the content div, image source, Everest biggest, alt, Mount Everest. Let's see what that looks like. Okay. Now, what is happening with the image as we go smaller? There, see what happens? The image is overflowing its container. It's too big. The image is not shrinking Look at that, in the phone size it causes a severe problem. Look at all that extra scroll being caused by that gigantic image. Now in order to make all images responsive, it's extremely simple. We'll create one CSS rule called image. Select the images and I'm going to say max width 100%, and that takes care of the problem. What that is doing is it's not letting images go beyond the size of their containing element. They can go smaller, but not bigger. So if I save that and preview it, the problem is fixed. Now obviously here I have the same image repeated, which doesn't look too good, but I just wanted to demonstrate how to fix that issue. So now we know what we need to in order to create a responsive website. And as you'll notice, this site has fixed dimensions. It's not even fluid. We can make it even more responsive by adding percentages instead of static width for our layouts. And again, the key thing here is to practice. So just to recap, responsive websites are created using these media queries as breakpoints where we establish a width, a max or min width, and we do something under those conditions. What we do then is entirely up to us. And another very important thing to keep in mind with responsive design is to have our images set to max width 100% so that all images that are in the source code will respond to the shrinking size of their parent elements.